Thank you for joining me, everyone. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I have been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 24 years and was introduced to the practice during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to work, I was on disability, I was unable to leave the house. My life effectively stopped. And I was fortunate enough to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And he is the one who introduced me to these practices. I had zero expectation for them. I thought that what he was offering to me was crap. And no one was more surprised than I was to find how powerful these practices are, partially because of what we're doing, often more so because of what we're not doing, which is getting in our own way, which is what I was doing for an awful long time, and still do sometimes, but I catch it a little faster now, and have built up some tools and techniques for reversing those cycles, creating cycles that are sustaining rather than draining, right? So today is the next in our ongoing series of calming anxiety by living mindfully. And I'm looking forward to sharing this week's technique, which is one that my own teacher took me through a number of years ago when I was going through a very difficult time. And it's one that I come back to during those difficult times when they arise, which, of course, they will now and then. So it's important that we have some skillful methods for working with them when they are here. So let's jump in. I always like to begin my sitting by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head, as a nice cue to sit up straight, without adding any extra tension to do so. If we are experiencing some tension right now, tension in the body, tension in the mind, tension in our feelings, that is allowed. Tension is allowed to be here. Usually when we're feeling tension, we try to get rid of it by forcing it away. And what is force but more tension? I've never found it very useful to try to get rid of tension by bringing more tension to it. I find that if tension is here, and I merely notice that, oh, there is tension here, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go away right away, but at least I'm not adding more tension to it. Like I say, not getting in my own way. I also like to notice what is beneath me. A chair, a cushion, floor. So there's a sense of grounding, support. Something is holding me up. It can do the job, and I can allow it to do so. Let's take a moment to notice this support beneath us, and this suspension from the ceiling at the top. And whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now, however it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And we often begin to shape or control our breathing in some way when we bring our attention to it. Perhaps because we think the breathing needs to be a certain way in our meditation practice, or perhaps because it's simply very challenging to pay attention to the breathing without interfering with it somehow. Maybe without even meaning to. But that's one of the things we're here to notice, is how we're working with the breathing. I find it very effective to work with it by simply allowing it to be as it is. And if I find that I'm still engaging in some kind of controlling or shaping of it, that may be very obvious or may be very subtle, maybe don't even notice it first, then I can simply notice that that is there as well. We're simply noticing the breathing as a process. Something that arises, develops, passes. And we're noticing how we're engaging with that process. Even if that engagement is simply noticing it. Let's take a moment to notice the breathing, however it is. And what our engagement with it is, however that is. Now, one of the things that I talk about in this practice a lot is how we are making space for things. How we are sometimes learning how to skillfully approach things that are uncomfortable. But how do we do this? Well, one way that I've found that has been very helpful for me is to work with my perception of it. And when I say work with my perception of it, I don't mean trying to talk myself into thinking it's different than it actually is. Not trying to talk myself into something or out of something. We're here to see things more clearly. Not to tell ourselves a different storyline than the one we've been using. So something I find very helpful, particularly as someone who is visually oriented, if I'm experiencing some kind of phenomenon, and by phenomenon I mean perhaps a physical sensation of discomfort, even if it's just something minor like an itch, or perhaps a thought pattern, perhaps an emotion. Perhaps it's a combination. Perhaps we're experiencing a physical sensation that we associate with a series of thoughts and emotions that we refer to as anxiety. What can be really helpful sometimes is to take a certain aspect of that experience, like a mental representation of one of the thoughts, or one of the feelings, or taking one of the physical sensations. And regardless of whether it's a physical sensation or a thought or an emotion, we can approach it with our senses as if it was any physical object. So, for example, if you have a physical sensation right now that is uncomfortable, or you have a thought pattern, or you have an emotion that is unpleasant, uncomfortable. And it doesn't have to be unpleasant or uncomfortable. You could do this with any of them. But let's just say for the moment something uncomfortable, if it happens to be here. Approach it in the context of applying your senses to a physical object. Where exactly is it located? And does it stay in that spot? I've talked sometimes about how I would observe an uncomfortable physical sensation and try to pinpoint exactly where it was centered. Only to find that the more I opened to it, the more I breathed with it, the more I found it kept moving. Every time I thought I pinpointed it, it wasn't there anymore. Like those eye floaters we all have. Every time you try to look directly at it, it shifts. You can't look straight at it. So this physical sensation, or this thought, or this emotion, where is it located? And does it stay there? I find it feels like it stays there if I'm pushing up against it to try to get rid of it. Then it kind of digs in. And my perception, again, we're working with our perception, is that it's solid, unyielding, unmoving, monolithic. But I'm creating that perception through my interference, through getting in my own way. What happens when I stop that? Oh, all kinds of new information has a chance to make its way in. And now my perception is very different. I find that the less I fight with the thing, the less need I have to fight with the thing. It may still not be pleasant, but it was my fighting with it that was making it so much worse. And we can take this a step further. This physical sensation, this thought, this emotion, whatever it is that you're perceiving right now, what color is it? Or what colors does it have? Do they stay the same? Do they shift? Does it have a shape? Does it hold that shape? Does it shift? Does it have a texture? Does that stay the same, or does it shift? Is it making a sound? And does that stay the same? Or does it shift? This is a new way of approaching uncomfortable states, mental, physical, emotional. In a way that allows us to gain some familiarity with something that might be unfamiliar. And might be unfamiliar not because we haven't had a lot of opportunities to work with it, but because we have not taken those opportunities. So this thing that is uncomfortable remains unfamiliar. And that which is unfamiliar is often uncomfortable. So this area of discomfort, this phenomenon that causes discomfort, stays uncomfortable. And this is another way that we get in our own way. Keeping something that's uncomfortable, uncomfortable. So we want to find creative ways like this one to begin to approach it. Work with our perception of it. See it a little more clearly. Learn how to relate to it in ways that are more familiar. And then that familiarity all by itself helps remove some of that discomfort. Even if it's just the discomfort of the unfamiliarity, that's still something. That's still more than we had before. We can anchor on our breathing. Breathe into and around and through. This physical sensation, or this thought pattern, or this emotion. And we can notice its color, its shape, its texture, its sound. How the breathing might affect these things. How these things might affect the breather. Seeing what stays the same and seeing what shifts, what does not stay the same. And that's enough. That can be enough. In my experience, that can be more than enough. We're changing our perception, which changes our experience. And that, in turn, changes our perception. And now, instead of having a cycle that is draining because of interference and unfamiliarity, we have a cycle that is sustaining. Because we are opening up and seeing more clearly. And this is how we can get out of our own way. Thank you, everyone. I will hang on here for a few minutes if anyone would like to share anything in the chat, any questions, observations. Summer Star, glad it resonated for you. That's a phrase that has always stuck with me throughout the years. Getting out of our own way. It's less about what's coming up and more about what we're doing with what's coming up, right? We get dealt certain cards and all we can do is play them. And we do the best that we can, right? Hey, Becky, ongoing shoulder pain. Yeah. This is a really good one for physical discomfort, I have found. One area where I've used it a lot is when I first had this introduced to me by my teacher a number of years ago. I think the first time we went through it, I was dealing with some anxiety and feeling a lot in my stomach, which I usually do, and I know I'm not alone in that. And I remember it was really interesting when he took me through this and said, okay, what color is it? And I was like, oh, this is interesting, especially for someone like me who's very visual. And I don't remember what my answer was. One thing I do remember, though, is when he got to the texture. And I remember I kind of saw it like, it's almost like if you remember in Poltergeist, like when they opened the door and all the stuff was flying around in the air in that room. I think it was in the bedroom. I haven't seen the movie in 40 years. It was sort of like that, except they were all sort of intertwined snakes. Like it was this very snaky sort of whirling thing, just all kind of, it was movement kind of going in every direction, but ultimately forming kind of this sphere that was spinning. And that was the way I viewed it. It was like just a lot of sort of chaotic activity contained within this sphere that was just spinning around in my stomach. It's the way I viewed it. And it's interesting to watch that movement as it played out and see like, oh, sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down. Sometimes these snakes or whatever you want to call these things were loosening a bit. You could see more space between them. Sometimes they were tightening in. And it was interesting to just observe that perception of those sensations that were associated with a particular emotion. You can see this whole chain of interrelations of causes and effects. Oh, there's this emotion and this associated physical sensation. And which one's causing which? Couldn't tell you, because it's just kind of a cycle now, right? They each reinforce each other. It becomes a feedback loop. Which one came first? Does it matter at this point? Who knows? I could sit here and try and figure it out for the next however long. Is that helping? No, not really. So what's another way to maybe work with this? Well, I can just see what it's actually like now. I don't know how it started. Doesn't matter how it started. What's here now? And I just had this new way of looking. What's the texture? What's the color? What's the shape? How fast is it moving? Is it moving? Where's it actually located? How does breathing affect it? How does it affect breathing? Suddenly there's this whole universe of ways to approach this thing that for a number of years, as soon as I felt any inkling of it, I immediately tried to shut it down, get away from it. And like I say, that keeps it unfamiliar, which keeps it scary. I'm unwittingly perpetuating the problem by trying to get away from it. So having these methods of learning how to gradually, sustainably approach it from different angles and gain some of that familiarity, it's a whole new world. It's a whole new world. Jesse, I feel that I stand more in my own way than anyone else ever has. Yeah, that's kind of the way it works. The Buddha has this quote along the lines of no mother, nor father, nor kin, nor anybody can do more harm to us than our own mind not directed well. No one can get in our way better than we can. So it's really important for us to figure out for ourselves how to do something different, how to stop. Because no one can do that for us. No one can get in our way as well as we can. No one can get out of our way as well as we can. It's on us. Perception of things that have happened have held me back, holding on to those emotions. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. We always have a reason for doing whatever we're doing. When there's something that we won't let go of. And sometimes we think of it the other way. Sometimes we think, oh, that thought won't let me go. It's like, no. I have this thing I like to call the direction of grip. When I notice, I'm being consumed by this thought has a grip on me. Does it? I mean, between the thought and me, which one of us has volition? Which one of us has choice? Not the thought. It's got to be this guy. So I'm gripping onto this particular thought, this particular emotion. And why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? Well, for the same reason any of us ever does anything. We think we're going to get something out of it. We think we're going to get something that is worth at least the amount of effort we're putting into it. We think we're going to get something out of it. So what is that? And that's where we need to start digging and opening up and saying, what is it that I think I'm going to get out of, or what is it that I'm actually getting out of holding on to this, all right? We do that with anger sometimes. Anger is not an entirely unpleasurable experience, right? We usually like that burst of energy that comes with it. It feels powerful, right? Sometimes we'll hang on to anger because that feels more pleasant than the other thing we're afraid we might be feeling if we don't hang on to that anger. I may know a thing or two about that. Becky, it was interesting because as I observed it, the pain moved to the other shoulder where I never have it. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's really fascinating. It was stomach area, again, stomach area pain that I first worked with when I noticed how I couldn't pinpoint it. It was during a sitting, and I was breathing into it, and I was noticing it, and I was doing some of this texture, color, and so forth. And then at one point, it dawned on me, I was like, I wonder if I can detect the dead center of it, like where it's actually emanating from. And I tried to drill in further and further and further, and thought I had it. I was like, there it is. And then like an instant later, it was gone. I was like, but no, I still felt it, but not in that spot anymore. I was like, wait, what? Okay, go looking around again. Oh, okay, there it is. Wait, it's gone. And it was a real aha moment that here was this thing that in my mind, again, my perception of it had been this stuck, unmoving, unyielding block. And this is the way I'd been thinking of it and relating to it for years. Never inquiring, maintaining my unfamiliarity, and then within minutes of dropping that and really asking, saying, no, where is this? I don't know. Let me find out. Within minutes of that, I discovered this monolithic, unyielding, unmoving thing couldn't even be pinned down for a second. So clearly, my perception had been very skewed, very inaccurate. I'd been experiencing unclear seeing for a very long time. And that was all it took to make a shift. Sometimes the very first thing we have to see clearly is that we have been seeing unclearly. Or put another way, the trickiest delusion is the thought that we are not deluded. Right? Samastar, we are stronger than our thoughts. Yeah, thoughts are just a process. Feelings are a process. Breathing's a process. Physical sensation is a process. What are we doing with these processes? Including how are we perceiving them? What causes and conditions are we putting in place to perceive them more clearly, more accurately? That's a way of getting out of our own way. Ren, I find it hard to deal with heart sensations, and if I focus on them, it often makes me more frightened. Focus elsewhere. Focus elsewhere. You don't have to start with the hardest thing. And in fact, I would suggest you do not. You could start with something where there is no discomfort and no particular associated fear. You could start with your hands. You could start with a body part you don't normally think about and one that you don't ever really see. You could start with the back of your neck. You could start with the tips of your ears. Just noticing some area and your perception of it. It doesn't even have to be something inside. You could do it with a breeze, an external sound, something external to you that you can see. You can do it with just the breathing itself. This is how we interact with our internal and external worlds, is through our senses. So anything's on the table, really. And if there are some areas that are scary to work with, perhaps some point in the future, we'd start dabbling with those. But again, we want to do this in a skillful, sustainable way. We don't want to make ourselves sick getting healthy. So remember to exercise some patience and compassion. Start small. All right, I think I will wrap it up there. I hope to see you all again real soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Cheers.